Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings changed my life. In the year of 2017, I found out that Bigfoot was in the area of where I live. I got interested. As a kid, I had always seen the shows on TV in the 70s showing where the Bigfoots were at, and I always just thought it was nothing more than an undocumented ape. Never thought it was anything really extraordinary. But when I found out, I went looking. And in the year of 2020, I got with another group, and me and one individual went camping every other weekend. And the things that happened were just extraordinary. I was yelled at, had a who contest back and forth. But then over Labor Day of 2020, we were out camping, and I had two of my kids with me with their husband and grandkids. And there was as many as 17 of us out during that day, out hiking, having fun, barbecuing, cooking over the campfire. And people had started leaving, which was fine. Some of us was camping, some of us wasn't. There was 8 of us left. It was about 70 degrees, so we weren't wanting to sit right there around the fire, so we were away from the fire. The parking lot was about 30 feet away. And I always picked, or try to pick, when to go was during a full moon. And of course, there was a full moon that night. It was coming up in the east. And the parking lot was to the east of us. Now, there was several cars that was parked. There was a little fence around the parking lot. And we had all of our cars lined up out there, cars and trucks. And we were just sitting around talking, and my back was to the parking lot. My daughter was sitting next to me, my oldest daughter. My wife was sitting at the end of her, but facing towards us. And then I had Darla and Ken next to me, sitting on the picnic table bench. And then there was a few others that was scattered around in front of me. And my wife kept saying, "There's someone in the parking lot." And I said, "No, everybody's right here." It had been an hour and a half since the last couple had left, and we were all gathered up. And she kept asking, "Well, where's Mike?" Well, Mike's right there. Well, where she was sitting, she couldn't see Mike, because Mike was about 6'3", I don't know, 300 pounds or so, big guy. And she said, "Somebody's in," just kept going. And she finally called out, "Who's in the parking lot?" That's when it dawned on everybody that someone must be in the parking lot. She could see the silhouette, the outline of someone standing at the end of the second vehicle in, which was two pickups. That was the first two that you could see. They were standing right at the back end of the second vehicle. And she had called out. Well, we all jumped up. I jumped up, spun around, and I mean, I was moving really fast doing it. Wasn't taking my time. By this time, it had moved to the other side of the parking lot over near a gate that goes back into some trails off into the woods. Well, Mike, his car was sitting over in front of the gate. When I spun around, I seen the outline of a huge figure. The shoulders was almost as wide as the car, and two orange-red glowing eyes about 10 inches apart, 7 feet up, staring at me. And I'm like, there it is. There it is. And I looked down to find a spotlight like everyone else was doing, and it shot off into the woods. So we had grabbed our spotlights, ran out in the parking lot, shining down in the woods, wasn't finding anything. And the wife calls us over to where it was standing. And here was this wet spot, about 2.5 feet round. It had peed in the parking lot next to the truck. My wife rubbed her hand in it, started sticking it in our face. Yeah, it was pee. And we were just all shocked. And we're all talking. We're all kind of roaming, looking down into the woods. And it was about 10 minutes after the sighting. We could hear it talking. And I'm like, is this thing griping at us or what? And it was talking to some others. They were having a discussion. What they were saying, I don't know. Normally when we would go out there camping, we would hear them randomly out in the woods. Tree breaks, wood knocks. The wood knocks would come about an hour before the sun would come up. But to hear them talking, they have a language. It was a gibberish to me, as was everyone else. But for them to talk, you know they've got to be intelligent. And it had stopped. It had went on for at least a good minute with them going back and forth. And we were just all in shock and awe because it was something that we all had wanted to do, that we wanted to hear. And the thing of it is, we had been so busy during the day that we had put nothing out during the day. No audio recorders, no cameras, no nothing. We had put nothing out. And that was probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Well, that was Labor Day. On Thanksgiving weekend, after we had gotten done with the family, with Thanksgiving and everything, we went back. This time, my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter had came, brought their kids. And again, there was a group of us out there. And we were out taking hikes and enjoying the scenery and cooking and eating and everything else. And we're having such a great time. my oldest daughter had brought her dog and we had brought ours. And those two just love to play with each other, and they're just zooming all over the place, running as fast as they can go, which was a great thing. Helped wear them out real good. But we had all went down for the night, and I wake up about 3 o'clock in the morning. I can tell the fire is roaring outside. It's about 20 degrees out. And I come out of the tent, and my oldest daughter's husband was up, and he says, there's something down there in that pond. There was a pretty good large pond down there that the state takes care of. And he said, something has been out there playing in that water for the past 3 hours. And I'm like, why didn't you wake me up? I mean, I got some night vision binoculars behind the tent in a tote. We could have looked to see what it was. And he said, yeah, well, this limb come falling down out of the tree too. There's no trees over our heads. And there was no wind blowing either. And you could tell by the look in his face that he was a little bit on the scared side. So this caused several people to get up. So we were all relieving ourselves and everything. And the dogs had took off. And they were gone for an hour and a half out running. And so finally we started going back to bed because it was so cold and we wanted to get back warm and everything. Well, the dogs show back up after we get in bed. And the son-in-law that was in the tent with us, he got up and put the dogs in the back of the truck. And I had 2 granddaughters in the back of the truck. So he got up, put him in, and came back in. 10 minutes later, the smell hits my nose, and I can hear this growling. And I'm like, what in the world? And I sat up on the cot, and I'm sitting here gagging, trying to not throw up. It was just so bad. And this growling has just kept going. Well, anytime I go out there camping, I would keep a 9mm up underneath my pillow. So I had the gun out and ready to shoot off if I needed to scare whatever it was away. Because I had 2 granddaughters in the back end of that truck. And I just kept sitting there, gagging, waiting for something to happen. And the smell finally went away, along with the growling. I'm assuming the dogs got out, found one or several, and made them mad and came running back to camp, and they were followed. But after it had walked off, it went up to where this one other gate was at, up the road, and it went screaming at us. It was mad. And luckily it went on and didn't give us any more problems that night. But then in April of 2021, one of the guys, it was his birthday, and for his birthday he wanted everybody to come camping. So we did. We were out there for 2 nights, and nothing really extraordinary went on for those 2 nights. But the next morning it was wanting to rain and everything, and everybody was, I don't sleep good when I'm out there because I've got my hearing on so good. that finally everybody got me up at 8 o'clock, and we packed up and went leaving. And we were driving down the road. We got up on the pavement, and there was a break in the woods. And there one was walking. It was walking up a little bit of a slight incline. And you've seen all the videos of how Patty walks, of swinging the arms and bringing the legs up. It was coal black, but it was a shiny black. It was probably 8 feet or more tall, really broad in the shoulders. And when its arms would come up, you could see the hair hanging down a good 6-8 inches. Same way with the legs. You could see the hair hanging down. And we're stopped in the middle of this back roads highway, hoping nobody comes up behind us flying, ramming us, which I knew we had some kids coming up behind us. And we sat there for a good minute or so, watching this thing walk up this hill. And me and the wife, we were just in shock of seeing this just fluently walking up this hill so easily, gliding. And to see one in broad daylight was just so amazing, so shocking, that we didn't know what to think. And it was just one of those things. We're out along the Mississippi River up in Cape County in Missouri. And it seems as though they're all up and down the Mississippi River. They're probably up and down most waterways, wherever there's abundant food and water. And to see these things is just, it's a little bit too much for the mind, because it's not your normal thing that you see every day. You see animals on TV, you go to the zoo, you see these things, you see them on a regular basis. But to see something for the first time is just a little bit more than what your mind can handle. In last year of 2022, I decided to go fishing. I've got a creek in the backyard. And in fact, it's the same creek that goes out to the area where we go for the Bigfoot. And it's a 20-minute drive. And of course, 20-minute drive ain't probably nothing more than a 30-minute walk for them. And so I'd went a few miles from the house down the creek where this concrete bridge is at, fishing. It's a real secluded area. There's one house that's a little bit up the road. And I had gotten down beside the bridge fishing. And I had caught a trout and brought it in and got it on the stringer and everything. It was a good sized trout. And I look up, and here's one holding on to a tree, stooped over. The tree was only about maybe 10 inches across. So it had its hands wrapped around the tree, stooped over, looking down, wouldn't look up at me. And I see this thing standing there. Now, there's all kinds of shadows around. And that's what was strange, was that the shadows, because the sun was coming up. It was about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. So there was a lot of shadows in there. But that was one shadow you couldn't see through. And it was only like 30, 40 feet in front of me. I'm sitting there and I'm looking, and I've been looking for these things for 2 years. I even sold my house 100 miles away and bought a house up here and relocated with new jobs and everything else. And I was just wanting to go fishing, being left alone, enjoy the seclusion. But it was a shadow you couldn't see through. And I'm like, hey, I'm not here for you. Leave me alone. I don't want you here. And I just started fussing at it. And I went back to fishing. I was using a lure, so I was throwing the line out there and reeling it back in. And after a couple of throws, I looked back over and it was gone. And I'm like, goodness, you've got to be kidding me. Now they're finding me. But I knew they had already found me, because I was out mowing the yard one day and found a print out in the yard. And we had just had a septic system put in a couple of months before. The grass was starting to come back up, but there was a print in the dirt. The house has been slapped on a couple of times one day. And then the daughter, she'll go outside taking the dogs out. And the dogs will have a fit. They don't even do their business. They just want right back in the house. There's a small patch of woods across from the house. And she says, there's something in those woods. And this went on for a few months. It was like one was out there watching us, watching the house. And I haven't been back out to the woods camping since 2021, because we'd went out there in the fall. And it was me, my wife, and her son. And I sat up in a screen tent so I could see out all the way around. And I'm sitting in this reclining chair. And the wind's blowing. The moon is up. But it seems like as soon as the moon started going down, the wind stopped blowing. And I was sitting there, and my head was on a swivel. I had the road in front of me that goes out or comes into the parking lot. And I'm sitting there, and my head's on a swivel, looking up and down the road. And around 2 o'clock, I spun my head toward the parking lot, and I seen a black silhouette move into the parking lot out of the woods. And I'm like, okay, I'm seeing things. I'm just tired. Surely they're not here. Surely they're not going to get that close again. But I'm sitting there, and it wasn't 10 minutes. I could hear footsteps in the woods right in front of me. And it was probably 8 steps, covering about 40 feet. Moving real nice and slow. And you could tell that it had to be something walking, because it was as if you were walking in the woods. You could hear the leaves crunching, limbs breaking as it was walking through there. It was probably 20 feet in front of me. And after a while of sitting there, listening, seeing if something was going to happen, Mother Nature calls. And I'm going to have to get out. And so I had finally gotten out of the tent, left everything in the tent, which I had a shotgun, cameras, night vision, everything sitting there, and I left it in there. And I had went to the back of the regular tent where my wife and her son was sleeping. And I was getting in a tote to get some wipes out. And I could hear a puppy dog. Sounded like a puppy barking over in the woods. And I'm like, okay, this is strange. And I couldn't hear it anywhere else except for behind the tent. It's like that was the only time that it would sound off. So I'd gotten up and finished my business, went to take the wipes back, and I could hear the puppy barking again. Well, I would think that if there was a dog out there, that it would have come to me. But it's like I just had this feeling that I believe I was getting hit with something. And it was like I didn't care. And I had went back and sat down, and I was sat down in front of the fire, listening, and I was just looking up, looking at the stars, because we're in an area where we're north of Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and the very first UFO crash was outside of Cape Girardeau. So you never know what you're going to see flying around in the sky. And I'm sitting there and started hearing tree breaks, everything like that. And I looked back down, looked over at the woods on the other side of the parking lot. And I said, okay, I know you're here. You're wanting some attention. You know, I guess you're wanting me to get up, do something to entertain you. And so I'd gotten up and I had sat over near the parking lot and just sitting there so they could get a good look at me and everything. But it was like I was up all night, but I had this attitude the next day, the next morning. I just had this really bad attitude. I wasn't tired. In fact, even after the sun came up, I grabbed a fishing pole, went down to the pond, caught about 4 catfish, and I wasn't myself. I just felt like that was one time that I was out there that they were trying to get me to come out into the woods. They were trying to take me. I've been back out there since, not camping, but it was just such a strange feeling. And we were going to stay 2 nights. And I told my wife, no, we're packing up and we're going home. I said, I need to get some sleep. I said, there's no way I can sleep out here. I just can't do it. I said, something is wrong. I don't feel right. And I feel like we need to leave. And so we did leave. That was in the fall of 2021. Now, in January of 2021, we were camping out there. And the niece and her husband from Indiana had came. And we were out there camping in January. It was cold. We had a huge fire roaring. And I've got a little 10 by 10 canopy. Well, theirs was about, I don't know, probably 15 by 15. We always put a canopy over the picnic table where we can set stuff, keep it out of the weather. And we had theirs up since it was much bigger. And we're out there at night. We're huddled around the fire. We're trying to stay warm and everything. And all of a sudden, the canopy jumped 3 feet. And we're like, what is going on? I mean, it made everyone jump. We all jumped up, went on the defensive, because we knew something had happened. And a few of us got over looking. And the conservation people had not been out there in a while, I guess. And the grass was growed up. And we found 2 rocks about the size of softballs on the grass. Not in the grass, like the grass grew up around it. It was, the rocks was laid on top of the grass, had the grass laid over. And we're like, okay, they're out here. They're watching us. We don't know if they're trying to run us off or if they're just being playful. I've always taken it as they're being playful. And we didn't have any more that happened that night. But going back to 2020, when I was out there camping with the one other guy, we would be out there and we would hear things off in the distance, yells, screams. And one night I woke up to this barn owl just going off over and over and over. And I had a pair of parabolic ears, so I'd put the headphones on and took the little gun and pointed it in the direction it was in. And I was hearing it very well. And the owl just kept going off. And it went off for about 15 more times. And then all of a sudden it's hoo 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 hoo. And I'm like, what in the world? This owl is putting out a tune. And it was so weird. I mean, I just could not move. I just kept listening to this thing singing a tune. And it's like, you gotta be kidding me. I know they do other creature sounds, as in owls and coyotes and everything. I mean, coyotes were fairly thick in that area, and you would hear coyotes go off, and you would always hear that one that was louder and longer than the rest of them. But for this to just go from a barn owl to hooting a song just was like, wow. Going on hikes out there. We were out there one day and we were in grass that was up to our chest. And it was in an area where that when the creek overflows, it fills these areas up. And they've got fish in them, and you can see where the raccoons go out there and other animals to try to catch some fish. But it was dry that summer. Hardly any rain at all. And once we came out of this little gully, this washout, it's like every step I took, I was stepping in a hole. And I said something to the guy that was with me. I said, Steve, every step I take, I'm stepping in a hole. I said, this can't be right. This should all be smooth. And I started pulling back the grass. And I find this 24-inch print that's in the dirt. Actually, it's clay up here. So it had to have walked through there while it was wet. And it was a 24-inch print. It was huge. But the strangest thing of it was it had 5 toes, but 3 were going straight. 2 were going kind of sideways. It had a messed up foot. And we had started pulling back grass all over the place. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. These things had been all over that field while it was wet. Don't know if they were walking in the water or not, but you could see what they were. And we would find prints all over the place. Even one time I found a handprint, which was just shocking because you could tell where our thumb is at, their thumb would be lower, like a gorilla. But the feet are like ours. And to find a lot of these prints, I mean, you would find them even on service roads that were graveled. And you would see the imprint being 2 to 3 inches down. And you could easily see what it was, and it would be in gravel. And you know they're around. You just never know when. But I know the first time we had been out there before just for little meetings with the groups. We'd get out there and hoot and holler and yell and see if we'd get any replies. But the first time I stayed the night out there was a little bit of a scare. I had been working 3.5 on, 3.5 off. And the one guy had went out there to go camping by himself. I had been working, so I didn't go out there for the first night. And I was talking about going. And me and the wife had went down to Arkansas to see one of the kids. It's just an hour drive. And we're sitting there eating lunch at a restaurant, and my phone goes off, and I look, and I see that he's saying he got run off, that about 3 o'clock in the morning, that they had surrounded the camp and was screaming and yelling at him, and he had cracked open the tent door and looked out, and one was standing about 10 feet in front of him. He could see the silhouette of it, and it was standing there screaming at him. And he took his .45, stuck it out the door, and let off a couple of rounds. And he said he could hear it running back off into the woods, crashing through the woods. And you would think with a gun going off that the woods would have went silent. And he said the woods just went absolutely crazy. And as soon as it got daylight, he got out of that tent, packed his stuff, and got out of there and swore he would never go back again. And I showed the wife the message, and I said, we need to go. So we had stopped, picked up a few things for camping. We used to have a camper and tent and all that. And we had sold it a few years earlier because we had decided we wouldn't, if we went back camping again, it would be renting a cabin or something. So we had picked up a few things, and we ran back up here. We were about 150 miles away. When we showed up, he had just left, but there was others there. And I was a cop in the military. So as soon as I got out of my truck, I went looking. I went doing an investigation because that's how I look at this. When I go out there, I'm investigating. And so I hit the ground looking. And they're like, well, there's a print over here and there's a print over here. And I said, well, what about this one? What about this one? And then I found one up on by the road. And the road's higher up than what the campground is, so there's a slope coming down. And something had jumped off that road down. The heel went about 6 inches into the ground and made the print. The print was in the grass, but, the grass was like over the top of it. And you could feel down in there and you could feel the toes. It hadn't rained in a long time. The ground is clay. It's hard as a rock. But for this thing to be that heavy, to step that hard down and be able to make an imprint in hard soil. Well, me and the wife decided we're staying. Everybody else is going to leave. And everybody's concerned about us staying out there by ourselves. And I said, we're okay. I took my AR. I had a gun on my side. So around 11 o'clock that night, somebody said, I hear you do a wild man call. Why don't you do your call? And I said, well, okay. So I put out this big long yell and I got a reply. The reply was a ways back. And we're like, okay, this was at 11 o'clock. Well, everyone left at midnight. Me and the wife are just sitting there in our chairs in the dark, facing each other. She's on her phone reading a book. There's a hillside on the other side of the road across from the campsite. I'm trying to watch it, but of course, her having her phone on, it's a little hard to see. And we're sitting there about 20 minutes. And the smell hits our nose. And we go looking at each other. And we're like, good God, what is wrong with you? We're both blaming each other. And you would think, okay, we'd be hee hee ha ha, but we weren't laughing because it was really potent and really bad. We're like, God, you stink. Having no idea that we probably had one 10, 15, 20 feet from us, watching us. And it was probably mad that we were there. But we were blaming each other. Well, it got about 1 o'clock. And the wife said, I'm going to get in the car and lay down. I'm ready to go to sleep. And we're in this little Mitsubishi Outlander. So I told her the only way we're going to be able to stretch out would be to leave the hatch open. And she said, no way. I don't want nothing grabbing me by the feet or nothing else, So she goes and she's getting ready to get in the car. And then here comes this yell back. The yell that I'd heard 2 hours before. Only this time, it's right down the road. It's wondering where I'm at. It come looking for us. And I'm like, no way. I am not going to reply. And I put the parabolics on. And I'm listening in that direction. Listening to see if something's going to come walking up on us. And I sat out there for another hour. And nothing did. Nothing came walking. So I was very happy. And I finally got into the car and we got very little sleep. I was busy just looking out the window at the hillside, waiting on something to come walking around, but we didn't hear anything for the rest of the night. But that was when I had first started going out there. And a couple weeks later, the guy said, I'll come back out there if you'll come. I said, okay, I'll come camping with you. I'd already said I would. And it's pretty bad that day I'd gotten ready to go camping. I don't have a tent. I don't have a cot. I don't have anything to camp in. And on my drive up there, I'm stopping at Walmart after Walmart. I stop in Malden, I stop in Sykeston, I stop in Cape, and I'm collecting up camping gear. Got a tent, got a cot, and we got up there. Well, he was putting his tent up by the road. I put mine back by the woods. And we had set up tent. We'd got out there about 1 o'clock that afternoon. I'd got out there about 1. He showed up about 2. And we got our thing set up. And this one couple came out, checked on us. Well, neither one of us had cell phone service out there, but the other couple that came out there checking on us did. So they called our spouses, let them know that we were fine. And they had left. And we're talking about June of 2020. Sun is up, 7 o'clock. It's hot. It's miserable. And he says, "Hey, you going to do your wild man call?" I said, "Well, yeah, I was going to. I just wasn't going to do it this early." You know, the sun was up and everything. He said, "Well, why don't you go ahead and do it?" So I went ahead and I let out the yell. And I'm standing there for a few minutes. And I'm like, well, ain't nothing going to yell back. So I walked to the back of my truck and got a soda out of the cooler. And I got over in front of my tent. And this scream from just inside the woods behind my tent came. And it was loud. It was deafening. It was like something you had never heard. The other guy was already in his tent, already had his shoes off, already laid out, comfortable. I'm standing here in front of the tent with my mouth wide open, staring at these woods, screaming at me. He's way up by the road. He's 100 feet from me. He's out of his tent, standing next to me, saying, see, I told you, I told you. And I look at him and I look back at the woods, and this thing is still going off. This thing had a set of lungs like you would not believe. It had been sitting in them woods watching us. And finally it had stopped. I was in shock. Having something that close to me, knowing that it's not a dog, it's not a fox, it's not a coyote, being that loud, that deafening. It's like you could feel it. It was so loud. Well, we had finally got done talking, got into the tents, and I'm laying there. I'm sweating something horrible. About 9:30, it got dark around 9. About 9:30, we could hear this commotion going on out in the field that's behind the patch of woods. And we can hear this commotion going on. Well, there's another commotion going on down at the creek. And I'm like, what is this? You got several yelling and screaming down at the creek and several yelling and screaming behind us. And I took my phone out and put it on video, even though you can't see anything. But you can hear these noises. And other people have sat and have listened to the video, and they're like, oh, that's dogs barking. Well, I know what I heard. And of course, with a phone, it doesn't pick sound up as well as what you're hearing. And everybody else is thinking, well, I hear this barking, but what I was hearing was more like a gorilla going, ooh, ooh, is what I was hearing. It sounded like there was about 3 of them in the field behind us. And every once in a while, you'd hear one mouthing off, and you'd hear this one yelping. and it sounded like a third giving their opinion. And then you would hear the bunch down toward the creek, which was probably a half a mile separated from each other. And they were just going to town. And finally, the bunch down by the creek, they started walking off. And you could hear them walking off, mouthing off while they were walking. And you're like, what is going on? And this went on for about 45 minutes. And it was just like, I've got myself in the middle of something. I don't know if I want to deal with this. I mean, I've been hunting ever since I was 13 years old. I mean, I had a BB gun. I had a pellet gun when I was before that, walking around the neighborhood, shooting birds and stuff, shooting cans. When I was a teenager, I would just grab my 22 and take off down to the San Francisco River and just go hiking through the woods, you know, just to have something to do. Been hunting all my life, squirrel, rabbit, deer. Never been scared of the woods, but now I'm starting to. What am I dealing with? Do I really want to do this? And I did. I kept going back. Every other weekend, I kept going back. Well, 1 month I would have weekends off. The next month I would work the weekends. So on weekends that I was off, the wife would go with me. And she would hear a lot of the stuff too. And she didn't know what to think. Which we were both getting into this. And we had just kept going further and further into it. And it became a real obsession. It's like having to go every time I was off. And we lived 100 miles away. We put our house up for sale, sold it. Big, beautiful home. Had a great job, making great money. My wife was making good money. She was an apartment manager. I'm a welder. And we sold out and we moved 100 miles north. 20 minutes from where these things are from. Took different jobs, took huge pay cuts. And since we've been up here, it's like we've slowed down. We've had to slow down because it was affecting us too much. Comes deer season, down where we did live, I had a guy that let me hunt out on his property, 160 acres outside of Campbell along the San Francisco River, where I could deer hunt. Up here, I really don't have anywhere to deer hunt. So I would go out there where the Bigfoot were. And I would go out there and I could not find myself able to step out of that truck until it got daylight. Once the sun would come up and I could see well, then I could get out of the truck. I just would not go do it in the dark. And there was this one field that was out there is where I would go hunting. You'd see all type of deer sign, all kinds of walnuts and everything. And I'd be walking out across there and all of a sudden I see this little puddle in this little dirt mound that's out in the middle of the field. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And I reached down into that puddle because it looked like a print. And sure enough, there was toes in it. And I went on over to where I was going to sit and hunt. And I'm sitting there and I'm doing my call, setting this call off. And I realize it's dead silent. There's not even a bird chirping. So I take my phone out and I tighten it in as much as I can, and I'm scanning the area to see if there's anything watching me, and I'm not seeing anything. And I'm like, there's no deer around. So I got up, went hiking deeper into the woods, and I just kept going down deep, 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 and nothing. It was just dead quiet. And finally I turned around and I went out and I left. And I'm like, this has affected me to where that I just can't go hunting. I just can't do it. And so having this fear, I've just not been going out there. I have been going out there, but I've been working on getting over this fear. And so right now I've got a daughter and a couple of grandsons here at the house. And so the grandsons, one's 17, one's 12. They're like, hey, we want to go out there. Let's grab some wood, go out there, start a fire, and see what's going on. So we'll go out there and we'll be sitting there by the fire, and we'll take some sodas and some food with us, some smoked sausage to cook over the fire. And I'll be able to tell that there's nothing out there, because normally if they're around, they're kind of letting you know. And so we've got to where that we'll go hiking the trails down into the woods 10, 12 o'clock at night. And we'd went out there one night, and we were quite a ways back. And these trails are for horses. And so we were seeing a lot of hoof prints. And of course, they've got the shoes on them, so we know what they are. And we'll see a deer print every once in a while. But we came up on this one muddy area, and I knew that muddy area was there. It's always muddy. And here's this print. The leaves are pushed into the mud. It's fresh. It's fairly fresh. It's probably within 6-7 hours. Because you could tell by looking at it. No leaves had gotten on top of it. And here's this print. And the boys were like, it's getting a little slippery. I think we need to go back. This is getting a little, a little hard to walk. And so we made our way back to camp. And as soon as we got back there, let's put the fire out and let's go home. And I'm like, okay. But these things have changed my life drastically. From someone who's no fear, going out in the woods, doing whatever, knowing that in this area where I've moved, there's bear, there's mountain lions, there's bobcats, there's all types of creatures out here. And I live in the country. I'm a mile down a private road. And the houses are so spread out, you don't see them. You hardly ever hear anything. But we're out here so far. I keep a gun in my truck. I keep one handy here in the house. Because you never know when you're going to step out. And a bear just got ran over up on the interstate. A bear cub, got ran over up on the interstate about 5 miles from my house. One of the neighbors that had kayaked down the creek told me that he'd found bear tracks. And, and you can tell the difference between a bear and a Bigfoot. I know a lot of people say, oh, it's bear tracks. A bear track has claws in it. a Bigfoot track looks more like a human print. I mean, I've seen both. And I've went to other people's houses where they've been having problems. And going out and looking and finding the evidence that yes, you have a Bigfoot around your house. But then we'll go a little ways away from the house where yells and screams are heard at night, and we'll find some mountain lion tracks, and we'll find some bear tracks. And they're so easy to differentiate the difference. But this has taken over my life almost. So now I just try to stay busy around the house, work, but it keeps calling me. It just keeps calling me to come back out there. I mean, I would love to just sit down with this thing and have a beer and talk and get an extremely good look. I mean, I've heard where people have committed suicide after having an experience with one of these. And other people, they just have them around their house all the time. I'm told that there's a woman on the other side of the Mississippi River over in Illinois where that she has a family of them that she feeds and been doing it for years. And if she forgets to put anything out, they'll remind her. And that the male, the alpha, he's always standoffish. He's always watching when she's out there. And the female and the little ones will sit there and will tear into the food. And the male won't do anything until she goes back in the house. And how do you deal with something like this? I mean, there's houses out there around where I go, and there are people out there that have told me, yeah, they're out here. I've got all kinds of stuff. I've heard everything. I've got recordings. But who do you tell? Who do you say that you've had this experience? People laugh at you. People sit there and say you're nuts. Oh, that's stupid. I mean, what do you do when family members start in on you? Saying you've lost your mind, you're crazy. You're selling your house, you're leaving a good job, and you're moving up there for these things. And who's going to believe you? There's a few that do. There's a few that believe, yes, there's a possibility of something like this existing when you know that they do exist. That there's no question in your mind that what you've seen was real. But then other people are like, I can't get up off the couch to go look. You know, I'll be like, well, come out with me. Let's go camping. Let's go camping for a few days. No, they don't want to go. Because they really don't want to know. Because it's more than what they would be able to take in. Some people just aren't able to handle the fact that something that is supposed to be a fairy tale actually exists. And it makes me wonder what else really does exist. Is Dogman real? Is the Wolfman real? Is all this other stuff that you hear fairy tales about, do they really exist? Do giants really exist? What is really on this planet that we don't know about? I mean, for decades, people have been laughed at over UFOs. And now the government admits that, yeah, they exist. They're here. What do you say? What do you do? If these UFOs exist, who's to say that they're from another planet? Who's to say that they're not from this planet right here? It's just that they are underground or in the ocean. That they're more advanced than us and they look at us like we're ants. Who's to say that this stuff cannot exist? and it's outside of our realm of understanding. What is it going to take for people to understand that I've seen this thing? I know what I've seen. I know what I've heard. I know what I experienced. I know how I'm feeling. But other people think you're a joke. Don't be afraid. Tell people what you've seen, what you've heard. Let them know you can laugh all you want. And hopefully you'll never see one. Hopefully you'll never have your world turned upside down. And you can live what you consider a normal life. When there are so many others out here in this world that have had their world turned upside down and know there is another side to this planet and know that they are here and that they are not going anywhere. What do you do? What do you say? All you can do is just live your life. And if you're having to live among these things, just live your life. I believe that the ones that are around the human populations try to stay away from us, but they try to get close enough to solve their curiosity, just like we're trying to solve our curiosity. But the ones that are in the deep forest that never hardly ever see a human, those are the ones that are dangerous. So be careful how deep you go into the woods. I know that it has changed my feelings so much that I traded my little 9mm pistol for a .44 Magnum with bear rounds. And I've gone from birdshot in a shotgun to deer slugs. And anytime I go out into the woods, I go armed. I'm not saying that these things will harm me. I don't think they will. But the fact that they're there and they're watching does affect you. And you don't know. I feel as though I've been hit with something on that one camping trip. They hit me with some type of infrasound or something, but I was hit. And it affected me on that one trip. And ever since then, I've really not been comfortable going to the woods. I mean, it's up to you. You can go look for these things. You've got to stay for a few days because you've got to wait until they come to you. And once they're there, they're there. They're watching. And they're not going to leave until you leave. They're watching at a distance. But you decide. I can't make up your mind for you. I know over a 2-year span of me looking for these things, of what it's done to me and how I feel. Believe me, don't believe me. They're real.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. It's pick 'em and it been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, bucking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time. Getting to the soul and the drummer look Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time. Getting to the soul and the drummer low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Something going backwards and double time. Getting to the soul and the drummer low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.